Assassin's Creed can be a difficult franchise to love. While the games almost always provide beautifully realized historical worlds, the stories they tell in and out of those worlds tend to be underwhelming or, in some cases, abandoned by the games entirely. It seems like the franchise feels burdened by the weight of its own mythology, bored of the questions it captivated so many fans by asking, and yet it feels antithetical to long for the glory days of a franchise that's only growing larger and larger as time marches on. What began as a Grail Quest story that combined mythology, history, and science fiction to weave gaming's strangest puzzle box inexplicably evolved into the narrative equivalent of an irascible, middle-aged street cat, and you don't want to scare it, so you just sort of hold out your hand to see if it'll let you say hi, and it steps kind of close and you think it'll let you pet it, and then it sort of hisses at you and runs away saying, "Oh, we resolved the Juno plotline in the comics, also Desmond has a secret son." So in this video, I want to look at the game that started it all, the somber and awkward progenitor of this increasingly bizarre universe. Assassin's Creed is telling two stories that interconnect surprisingly well. In the modern-day storyline, we have a narrative mystery box, a world on the edge of a knife in the death grips of a sinister corporation, and a hero who is seemingly powerless to stop it. In The Animus, we're playing through an introspective historical romp that pushes both character and player to reflect on freedom and faith. The questions that arise in the past focus the lens through which we view the modern-day storyline. Abstergo quickly evolves from a one-note corporate evil to a philosophy made manifest, a final evolution of a bold and terrifying idea that the ends deemed righteous by a select few will always justify the means. It's a work of genuine ambition, a daring narrative proof of concept for a fascinating series that Ubisoft will eventually abandon to make the series more approachable. So, despite its fairly substantial issues with both pacing and plot, I find myself appreciative of it anyway, charmed and provoked by this strange game that somehow birthed gaming's most unlikely juggernaut. So grab some coffee or tea or chuck this up on a second monitor or even, good night, I guess. A lot of people say that they watch this to sleep. And let's dive into history. The Third Crusade, and somewhat less glamorous, 2012, as former assassin Desmond Miles is about to be ripped away from his unassuming life and plunged into history's bloody pages. This introduction has a lot to do, and I don't think it sticks the landing. There's no graceful leap into the hay for Assassin's Creed. Instead, it snaps a leg and spends the first hour awkwardly stumbling around, hoping you'll give it the chance to redeem itself. Pacing is the main issue, but looking back on what the story becomes, particularly the modern-day storyline, I think it also lacks confidence. The first half hour of the game is so obsessed with explaining itself that we never really build any momentum. The choice to start the game with a glitching, distorted version of our climax is a strong one. Like all good mystery box stories, we're immediately prompted to ask questions. In this case, it's, "What the hell?" And speaking of questions, what do I mean when I use the term mystery box? If you're not familiar with the term, you're probably familiar with some of the media that would qualify as one. Lost, Westworld, Stranger Things, Dark, Yellow Jackets, a mystery box or a puzzle box show is a show that's built around, unsurprisingly, mystery. These are shows that weave together a lot of strange and complex details and subplots to gradually form the bigger picture, encouraging viewers to speculate about how everything contributes to the world's broader mythology. The X-Files deserves an honorable mention as one of the first shows to really try something like this. I think we get the term from a TED Talk delivered by J.J. Abrams back in 2007, when Abrams described his creative process as almost presenting a series of mystery boxes.
The thing is that it represents infinite possibility. It represents hope. It represents potential. And what I love about this box, and what I realize I sort of do in whatever it is that I do, is I find myself drawn to infinite possibility and that sense of potential. And I realize that mystery is the catalyst for imagination. Now, it's not the most groundbreaking idea, but when I started to think that maybe there are times when mystery is more important than knowledge. In terms of the content of it, you look at stories, you think, well, what are stories but mystery boxes? There's a fundamental question. In TV, the first act is called the teaser. It's literally the teaser. It's the big question. So you're drawn into it. Then, of course, there's another question, and it goes on and on.
Abrams isn't the first creator to really lean into this style of writing, but he does appear to be highly influential in how it's been labeled. When done well, this style of television can spark discussion and theory crafting like no other, each episode catalyzing further discussions that can take place on and off the internet. However, it's worth noting that it's incredibly hard to do this well. Asking questions is easy, answering them in a satisfying and interesting way is exponentially more difficult, something that Assassin's Creed quickly discovers as the series progresses. Assassin's Creed 1's modern-day storyline is fairly minimalist, but rewards the engaged player with a ton of strange and interesting information about the Assassin-Templar conflict and the crumbling world outside of Desmond's prison. The big twist at the end of the game is just taking it a step further, giving players an entirely new puzzle to piece together. Desmond is roused from the animus at Lucy's insistence, snapping him back to reality with a helpless rage.
You kidnapped me! You strapped me into that thing!
Animus. It's an animus.
I don't even know you people! Why are you doing this to me?
You have information we need, Mr. Miles.
Information? I'm a bartender, for Christ's sakes! What do you want me to do, teach you how to mix a martini?
We know who you are, what you are.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't play coy with me. There isn't time. You're an assassin.
Good puzzle boxes have to have the confidence to let the audience make their own connections. Instead, Assassin's Creed plays a surprising amount of its cards in the opening minutes. We confirm that Desmond is or was an assassin, even though we don't really know what that means yet. We can see Vidic has a big old Templar cross pinned to the right of his red tie, and then this is all followed up by a 2-minute sequence that explains how the animus functions before throwing us into an excruciatingly dull tutorial. I can't help but feel like the sequence would be strengthened by telling us less, if the first part of this mystery box was players figuring out for themselves the connection between Desmond and Altair, and thus the connection of Desmond as an assassin. How the animus functions and why they need Desmond specifically is something we could uncover during the game. Instead, it's exposited to us in the opening minutes.
What if I told you that the human body not only housed an individual's memory, but the memories of his ancestors as well?
What follows is one of the most dull, sluggish tutorials I've ever played. We'll eventually pick up on Altair in a temple in Jerusalem, but for now we plod through the game's most basic concepts in the sterile blue void of the animus. Not only does this completely kill whatever was left of the game's momentum from the opening hook, but the next 90 minutes of gameplay are just going to be more tutorials anyway. The Masyaf opening and the first Damascus mission are just slightly more interesting, better integrated ones. I think this is one of those moments where it's important to acknowledge how different game narratives are from other stories. In a book or a movie or a show, if there was a section like this that dragged down the pacing, you could edit it out or rewrite it, whereas here it feels like early players struggled with a puppeteering system and this was wedged in for additional guidance. With that said, if they were intent on keeping this explicit tutorial, then I think the game would benefit from trimming elsewhere, especially the Masyaf investigation, because as it stands you have to play for about an hour to get to Damascus, and once you're in Damascus, it still feels like the training wheels are on. It's just strange. Assassin's Creed is insecure enough in its premise to feel compelled to explain too much to the player in the first 5 minutes, but paradoxically, also feels comfortable with applauding opening 90 minutes, as though it's sure that players will stick around and wait for the story and gameplay to get a little more interesting. The story does get more interesting though, and the historical side begins with a swift fall from grace from Altair. He's uncharismatic, violent, and arrogant, a strange protagonist for Ubisoft to start a franchise with, but by the conclusion of his arc, I think Altair grows on the player quite a lot. Again, it's demonstrative of a strange confidence from Ubisoft, though unlike the aforementioned pacing in the first act, I think this choice is much more commendable. Altair is a complex and somewhat unorthodox choice for a hero, but he fits this story remarkably well. And while it's a little rough in this game, his arc is continued to masterful effect in subsequent ones. For now though, Altair begins this game as a deeply unlikable character. Right from the jump, his arrogance and contempt practically seep through the screen.
An excellent kill. Fortune favors your blade.
Not fortune, skill. Watch a while longer and you might learn something.
Indeed. He'll teach you how to disregard everything the Masters taught us.
And how would you have done it?
I would not have drawn attention to us. I would not have taken the life of an innocent. What I would have done is follow the creed.
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Understand these words. It matters not how we complete our task, only that it's done.
But this is not the way
My way is better.
He kills an innocent man, clearly places himself above those he's with, and warps the creed of his brotherhood to justify his lethal actions. His line of, "It matters not how we complete our task, only that it's done," is an important one to highlight here because we'll eventually discover that this is a core philosophy of the Templars. Deeper into the temple, the assassins find what the Templars have located, though it's far from unguarded.
Quiet! Someone's coming!
I want us through this gate before sunrise. The sooner we possess it, the sooner we can turn our attention to those jackals at Masyaf.
Robert de Sable. His life is mine.
No! We were asked to retrieve the treasure and deal with Robert only if necessary.
He stands between us and it. I'd say it's necessary.
Discretion, Altair!
You mean cowardice. That man is our greatest enemy, and here we have a chance to be rid of him.
You have already broken 2 tenets of our creed. Now you would break the 3rd. Do not compromise the Brotherhood.
I am your superior, in both title and ability. You should know better than to question me.
We've now introduced all 3 tenets of the Assassin's Creed, all while building that characterization of Altair as an arrogant, violent man who either twists it to suit him or believes it doesn't apply to him depending on the situation. We've introduced a mysterious relic that appears to be part of the famed Ark of the Covenant. We've also introduced the Assassin-Templar conflict, as they have a clear history with Robert de Sable, and Robert even mentioned that after they retrieve the artifact, they plan to deal with the jackals at Masyaf. We've hit these beats with efficiency, but right here is where Assassin's Creed plants the seeds that will end up undermining its first half mystery. The Assassins and the Templars already know each other, already have a combative relationship. From here, Altair's story is about his understanding of the Assassin's Creed and its failings, but also his uncovering of the Templar Order, a network of ambitious, capable men and women working under Robert to take control of the Holy Land to free it from war by any means necessary. I think we're meant to understand that these are technically 2 different entities, that Robert spins off from the Templars we know from history to create the Templar Order, a shadowy faction of global domination. But for something so vital to the core of the game's plot, the game does a terrible job of establishing this. One of the game's only side activities involves hunting down and killing Templars in the open world. Again, I suppose we could assume they're the Knights Templar, but if that's the case, why are we hunting them so emphatically? When Altair learns partway through the game that his targets are all connected, each a piece of a larger puzzle, and it's revealed that they're all Templars, this revelation doesn't feel shocking or even that interesting because we've been fighting them the entire game. Altair descends the ladder to confront Robert, and it doesn't exactly go as planned.
Well, this explains my missing man. And what is it you want?
Blood.
You know not the things in which you meddle, assassin. I spare you only that you may return to your master and deliver a message. The Holy Land is lost to him and his. He should flee now while he has the chance.
Altair comes across as a homicidal buffoon in this scene, but we're also seeing Robert's flair for theatrics, as he clearly wants to humiliate Altair and by extension, Al-Mualim. We keep building that sense of mystery too. Robert's line of, "You know not the things in which you meddle," is effective confirmation that there's more to this situation than meets the eye. This moment hits harder when players have already played the game and are familiar with the big twist. In this moment, Robert truly does know way more about the artifact and Al-Mualim than Altair. He's not just saying this to be moderately villainous. Altair returns to Masyaf in shame, believing his mission to have been a failure when Malik, one of the other assassins on the mission, emerges with the artifact in tow. In following the creed, he has somehow snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, though his brother was killed in the process and Robert and his army are close at his heels. After a brief defense of the village, the assassins fall back, and Altair and 2 others are instructed to climb a nearby tower as part of Al-Mualim's defense plan.
My men do not fear death, Robert. They welcome it, and the rewards it brings.
Good! Then they shall have it all around!
Follow me, and do so without hesitation.
Show this fool knight what it is to have no fear. Go to God!
Robert and Al-Mualim have a fiery exchange, and 2 things are notable about this moment. Robert does not expose Al-Mualim's secret here, even though it could theoretically end the siege or at least cause chaos within the ranks of the assassins, and Al-Mualim mentions the rewards of death before explicitly sending his assassins to God. I think on a first playthrough, Assassin's Creed's historical storyline gets away with a lot because it has all the pieces to feel like an elaborate mystery if you're not paying that much attention. On closer inspection, however, a lot of this plot doesn't make much sense at all. If you're not familiar with this game, the big twist at the end is that Al-Mualim was part of the Templars that discovered the Piece of Eden, and he uses Altair to hunt down the rest of the Order so that he alone would know the artifact and its secrets. He could then use it to indoctrinate the population of the Holy Land, ending the war by robbing the people of their free will. When Robert tells this to Altair in his confession on a first playthrough, I think most players will be surprised. How can this be? On a second playthrough, or even just thinking about it a bit more, the question shifts to, no really, how can this be? We'll expand on that more when we get there, but he casts a shadow over this moment here because it just feels inconsistent. Neither Robert nor Al-Mualim actually believe in a god of any kind. This game strongly implies that there is no god, nor any true miracles, just fragments of a precursor civilization that have been discovered and wielded to miraculous results. So Al-Mualim's go to God moment is just strange because both he and Robert know that there is no God, and we never see the assassins portrayed as a spiritual organization. They view faith as part of the world's illusion. I know it's just part of the distraction, but a more sophisticated story would have used this moment to build an uncanny familiarity between Al-Mualim and Robert, perhaps even make Al-Mualim's lack of a reference to a divine part of the broader puzzle of this universe. This is the only time in the game these two will be on screen together, and it's just used as a setup to this little action scene. All we get is this strange moment that undermines Robert's cunning and does nothing to deepen our mystery. Altair climbs the tower, releases the trap, and the Templars are forced to flee. Then comes the delayed judgment. He still has to pay for his failure at the temple, for his dismissal of the creed. There are parts of the scene that we'll circle back to later because I started noticing some parallels between Al-Mualim's behavior here and some of the Templars that we assassinate, but for now let's just look at the way that the scene concludes.
Yet your selfish act beneath Jerusalem placed us all in danger. Worse still, you brought the enemy to our home. Every man we've lost today was lost because of you. I am sorry. Truly I am. But I cannot abide a traitor.
I am not a traitor.
Your actions indicate otherwise. And so you leave me no choice. Peace be upon you, Altair.
Altair did not bring the enemy directly to their home. Robert already wanted to fight the assassins. He literally talks about it before Altair has his moment of hubris.
The sooner we can turn our attention to those jackals at Masyaf.
Altair is unbearable in this opening sequence, but he is not to blame for the conflict today. This moment really only works in retrospect, if we view it as Al-Mualim bending the truth to justify his bringing Altair as low as possible, because he knows that an Altair fixated on redeeming himself is an effective weapon to turn against his enemies. It doesn't exactly feel like justice though, and it's part of the reason I've never found the Al-Mualim twist in the game to be that impactful. Not only does the twist make little sense from a practical standpoint, but Al-Mualim has been violent and somewhat petulant this whole game. There's a later moment when Altair questions him, and Al-Mualim grabs a sword as though he's gonna kill Altair again. Of course this is a man who would be tempted by a treasure like the Apple of Eden. From the start, he's never come across as all that wise or even relatively measured. He rails against Altair as an arrogant failure, but refuses to take any responsibility for raising him to be this way. It's not until Assassin's Creed Revelations that this relationship is portrayed as anything other than somewhat hostile. And in this first game, the emotional side of this relationship and eventual betrayal just really doesn't work for me. Altair appears to have just been executed, and Desmond is pulled from the Animus. We can eavesdrop on the conversation between Lucy and Fiddick, and it's clear that there's a growing tension between the two of them over how Desmond should be treated.
Which is why there's no time to coddle him.
If you push him too hard, he'll shut down, and then we'll have nothing.
We have nothing now.
But we will. You just need to have a little faith.
If we read this as Lucy just talking to Fiddick, this line feels wildly out of place. Lucy using faith in her appeal to Fiddick, a man who built his life around science, working for an organization that knows definitively that there has never been a god, is such a crime against rhetoric it belongs in a YouTube comment. But of course, she's not actually talking to Fiddick here. I think this is a message for Desmond. I know it looks like you have nothing now, but you do. Have a little faith. She's the one who moved this conversation to the conference room where she likely knows she can be overheard and hints to Desmond to stretch his legs.
Why don't we discuss this in the conference room? Give Desmond a minute to stretch his legs.
It's a nice little clue for players that there's more to this character than it seems. The next morning, Desmond wakes to find Fiddick lurking above him, and we partake in a conversation that's vital to understanding the Templar philosophy.
Your ancestors almost had the right idea, Mr. Miles. If the deaths of a few people, evil people, no less, could save the lives of thousands more, well, it seems a small sacrifice.
What do you mean, almost?
They didn't go far enough. To use a rather tired analogy, corruption is no different than cancer. Cut out the tumors, but fail to treat the source and, well, you're buying time at best. There's no true change to be had without comprehensive, systemic intervention.
Chemo for the masses.
education, re-education, to be more precise. But it's not easy, and it doesn't always take.
There's that old writing adage that good villains should be the heroes of their own stories. It's a bit of an oversimplification, and it's far from a hard and fast rule, but it's a quick test to check a villain's three-dimensionality. The Templars here in AC1, both in the modern day and the Crusades, embody this idea very well. They don't do what they do just to be cruel or to hoard power. They really do spend their lives working to bring peace to the world. It just happens to be their version of peace, achieved by any means necessary. So we flesh out the Templar philosophy, but we've also introduced one of the most fascinating tensions of the game. The creed in the Au Revoir era and the philosophy of the Templars isn't that far apart on the ideological spectrum. There is a lot of overlap, but by the end of the game, Altair points to free will as the defining separation. We don't really get to see how or why he comes to this conclusion, but I like the final argument between the two of them all the same. Re-entering the Animus, the player and Desmond discover that Altair is not dead after all. Instead, we open on Altair in Al-Mualim's study, incredulous at this strange turn of events.
I am alive. But I saw you stab me. Felt death's embrace.
You saw what I wanted you to see. And then you slept the sleep of the dead, of the womb, that you might awake and be reborn.
To what end?
Do you remember, Altair, what it is the assassins fight for?
Peace. In all things.
Yes, in all things. It is not enough to end the violence one man commits upon another. It refers to peace within as well. You cannot have one without the other.
So it is said.
So it is! But you, my son, have not found inner peace. It manifests in ugly ways. You are arrogant and overconfident.
Were you not the one to say that nothing is true and everything is permitted?
You do not understand the true meaning of the phrase, my child. It does not grant you the freedom to do as you wish. It is a knowledge meant to guide your senses. It expects a wisdom you clearly lack.
We would be remiss if we didn't address the obvious, especially in a story that plays with the concepts and imagery of faith. Altair is back from the dead. He is risen. We don't know how yet. All we get is that line about seeing what Al-Mualim wanted us to see. It's foreshadowing the explicit revelation that Al-Mualim delivers to Altair later, that almost everything perceived as a miracle or divine meddling has just been a piece of Eden manipulating minds. But it's baffling that this is never brought up again in Altair's story. His fellow assassins have no reaction to his resurrection, and it's never referenced again beyond this point where it's just used to signify his rebirth. One of the core ideas in this universe is that there is no god or gods as we understand them, and it's part of why both the Assassins and Templars are trying to stop the Third Crusade in their own way, because they view it as men throwing their lives away for phantoms. And here, Al-Mualim has easily replicated one of the biggest miracles in Christendom, and we just gloss over it as a cool little cliffhanger to conclude the Masyaf defense, as though Ubisoft is a little too nervous to further subvert this Christ imagery. The other half of this conversation is more important, however, establishing the goal of the Assassin Brotherhood and, by extension, Altair. The Al-Mualim era assassins fight for peace in all things, a lofty and admirable goal that we'll eventually come to see the danger in. And then this snippet from Al-Mualim that the "nothing is true, everything is permitted" line,
"It does not grant you the freedom to do as you wish. It is a knowledge meant to guide your senses. It expects a wisdom you clearly lack,"
highlights what my primary issue with the motto up to this point was. It's a terrible guide for human behavior. It's not a moral code, it's a loose philosophy to guide action. The virtuosity of those actions will still be tied to the character of the person behind them. Altair is chided for being arrogant and violent, but he was raised by this brotherhood, surrounded by their ideas from a very young age. Is his lack of moral fiber not partially the fault of the assassins in their creed? But this is exactly the sort of question Assassin's Creed is pushing us to ask here, so I kind of love this part. Since the current iteration of the Assassin's Creed presupposes wisdom, it's open to be exploited by dangerous, ignorant men, the way that we saw Altair exploit its tenants back in Jerusalem. It's these moments, this conversation between Altair and Al-Mualim, where we literally interrogate the creed, that gives this game its twisted little genius. Any game that presents a philosophy only to immediately start poking it with a metaphorical stick has piqued my interest, and Assassin's Creed doesn't stop poking or prodding until the credits roll. The further brilliance of these scenes is that we come to realize that Al-Mualim, this old, wise man, is unconvincing in these discussions because he doesn't really believe these ideas anymore. If he sounds like he doesn't have a fire in his heart for defending a liberated humanity, it's because he doesn't. He already has the apple, already knows that there's an easier way. Both Assassin's Creed and this video can pick up the pace from here, as most of the narrative and ideological groundwork has been laid. Investigations are tutorialized as Altair attempts to uncover a traitor residing in the village. He finds him, and the man says,
"We served the Templars. You should too. Their cause is just."
I guess everyone just thinks he means the Knights Templar here. Again, just a small example of how this game undermines its big mid-game revelation by not separating the Knights Templar from the Templar Order. After this confrontation, Altair lugs the man in front of Al-Mualim to face his justice.
I offer you a chance to repent, to renounce the evil in your heart.
It is not evil in my heart, but truth. I will not repent.
Then you will die.
Repent is used twice in this exchange, once from Al-Mualim and once from the prisoner, and it's that specific word choice that fascinates me because of its religious connotation. It's cleverly written so that it works on a surface level. If the prisoner expresses remorse for his actions, Al-Mualim may be willing to spare him. But with how much the Altair storyline is and will become a confrontation of faith, Repent's obvious connection to divinity adds such a tense layer to this scene. Depending on your reading, Al-Mualim is playing God in every sense of the word, asking the prisoner not to repent to any deity, but to him, and it is Al-Mualim who will provide the final judgment without hesitation. On subsequent playthroughs, with what we know of Al-Mualim's ultimate goal, this moment has a very sinister undertone. With the traitor dealt with, Altair is told he will have to hunt 9 men across the Holy Land.
In doing so, you'll sow the seeds of peace, both for the region and for yourself.
Again, a vague line that works even better after we know the game's big twist. Altair is still sowing the seeds of peace here, he's just killing everyone else who knows about the apple so that Al-Mualim may wield it freely and subjugate the masses. So we're off to Damascus, but not before we trudge through the strange and mostly lifeless kingdom section of the map. From a gameplay perspective, it feels more like a proof of concept that this combat system and parkour formula can function outside of a dense urban environment, but the lack of any actual missions taking place here doesn't really give it the chance to prove it. There are pretty sections, charming little hamlets and surprisingly scenic vistas, but because the gameplay is so boring here, it makes it difficult to appreciate them. What it does provide is an effective contrast that makes the cities feel more alive by comparison, and having endured this kingdom section, we finally arrive at Damascus. Damascus is my personal favorite, but all of these cities elevate Assassin's Creed from a middling action game with an ambitious ideological conflict to the gaming classic that launched 1,000 sequels. When we talk about Assassin's Creed, we treat the setting like a character in a way that we do with few other pieces of media, and for good reason. Rome or Paris or Egypt are as vital to their respective AC games as New York is for Sex and the City.
Another Sex and the City?
Guilty as charged.
But here in Assassin's Creed 1, while still impressive, the cities are some of the weakest we'll see in the franchise. Part of that comes from the oppressive use of filters to establish tone and atmosphere rather than something subtler and more immersive. It's most egregious in Acre, where everything is dulled to this rancid blue that robs the city of life in the most boring way. I'm guessing that's what they were trying to accomplish. It's a scarred city resignedly clinging to life. But for me, the destroyed roofs and collapsed houses were an exponentially more effective way to convey that than just making everything blue and lightless. It's part of the reason Damascus is my favorite. Relatively untouched by the broader crusade, Ubisoft allows it to shine unburdened by an oppressive color grading. Citizens crowd its sun-drenched streets, thriving palm trees add a splash of green to the warm tans and browns of the houses and merchant stands. There's even a small canal by the gate, the faded blue water ready to kill Altair if he so much as looks at it the wrong way. There are 2 side activities in these cities that closely tie into the main story, synchronizing with viewpoints and saving citizens. Viewpoints reveal the location of the Assassin Bureau and investigation opportunities, and saving citizens will unlock vigilantes to help distract guards or groups of scholars to sneak into secure areas. The viewpoints are fine, there's way too many of them and they end up feeling very repetitive, but it's the saving citizens mechanic that I find somewhat baffling. Part of what makes the assassins so interesting is that in this first game especially, they're not particularly heroic. Altair will frequently watch innocent people get hurt or killed by his target in front of him, but will still bide his time in the crowd waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sure, they desire peace in all things, but that's more of a goal than a mandate to go out and protect everyone you see. So saving these people, especially in these quantities, undermines both the morally gray nature of Altair, the assassins, and the guards involved. Each city probably has about 20 citizens to save, so across the 3 cities that's about 60 incidents where Altair would have to stop what he's doing, descend from the rooftops, and fight the guards harassing somebody. While that may be consistent with how Altair may behave at the end of his arc, at the start of the game it feels at odds with the man who killed someone just for getting in his way in Jerusalem. Each citizen is also harassed by 4 or 5 guards too, so it accidentally creates this feeling that half of the guards in these cities are just violent goons harassing people for fun.
Thank you, my boy. I only wish my sons were half as brave as you. I'll see to it that they hear this tale and know what it is to be a true hero.
So through these events, we lose a lot of the moral ambiguity of Altair and the guards, and we lose a bit of that fantasy of being a blade in the dark. Instead of a shadowy figure in scholar's robes springing from the crowd to take out his target, we become the people's champion, supported by the streets. It's a gameplay choice that seems like it actively undermines the game's tone and core premise. At the bureau, Altair checks in with the local leader, who mocks him before he points him in the right direction for his investigation.
A few of your brothers were here earlier, in fact. Oof, if you'd heard the things they said, I'm certain you'd have slain them where they stood.
It's quite all right.
Yes, you've never been one for the creed, have you?
Is that all?
I'm sorry. Sometimes I forget myself.
What a Miranda. I like that we're establishing how uniformly Altair is disliked and how swift his fall from grace has been, but it's strange that part of the rumors aren't about Altair's resurrection. He's essentially Al-Mualim's personal spirit of vengeance now, but we never really addressed that element. The Bureau leaders are the most notable way we track Altair's redemption within the Brotherhood, and even they never really mention this. Altair completes his investigation, and we report back to the leader before being authorized to strike. Being the game's first, Tamir is an easy target, and after Altair watches him kill his own merchant for disappointing him, we can strike quickly and easily to make the kill. In his confession after the killing blow, Tamir hints to Altair that he's part of something bigger, that his work was about more than just greed.
It seems you're the one pays now, my friend. You'll not profit from suffering any longer.
You think me some petty death dealer, suckling at the breast of war? A strange target, don't you think? Why me, when so many others do the same?
You believe yourself different, then?
Oh, but I am. For I serve a far nobler cause than mere profit. Just like my brothers.
Brothers?
Ah, but he thinks I am. I am but a piece.
I don't think the franchise has ever offered a definitive explanation for when or how these post-death confessionals happen, but in this first game that's grappling so intensely with ideas around faith and rituals of faith in a godless world, the fact that we'll always have these confessional moments after a kill feels interesting. Rarely do our targets seek absolution, but they almost always seek mutual understanding, and always through this confessional format that seems like a clear homage to the Catholic practice. I don't really know where this goes thematically, because Al-Mualim or Robert's attempts to play God is always coded as evil. Maybe since this is more the assassin playing priestly messenger than God, this is supposed to be virtuous. They're not providing spiritual judgment the way that Al-Mualim or Robert would, they're just listening and granting peace. I don't know what to do with this, but I wanted to clock it and maybe see if anyone else had a more cohesive theory for how this all fits. After making it back to the Bureau, Desmond is pulled from the Animus for the night. This is the first time in the game we can start doing some investigating as Desmond to learn more about the world around us, start poking and shaking this modern-day puzzle box. We learn that Abstergo has a deadline and needs to find the information in under 6 days, but Lucy says she can't give Desmond any answers right now. There is one question she does answer, however.
Why is it that sometimes the guys in there talk like they're from the future?
The future?
I mean the present. Now, today, whatever.
You've probably noticed that English has become the official language of the Holy Land.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
The Animus is translating speech it deems vital into more modern English, so expect a few anachronisms. I could probably make it more authentic, but... You ever read Chaucer?
Who?
Yeah, definitely not for you.
Desmond calling the present day the future prompts Lucy to quickly correct him, and we'll later learn it's because she's closely tracking his behavior for signs of the bleeding effect. I love her reference to Chaucer here too, and that it doesn't really mean anything to Desmond, the man who was raised in a compound. Most of us have probably been exposed to Chaucer at some point. Whenever I try to read it, I always feel like I'm reading one of those websites that tries to simulate dyslexia. It just looks kind of wrong. Lucy prompts Desmond to look at her computer for answers multiple times, including the incredibly conspicuous addition of
The telecommunication stuff is particularly interesting.
She's priming Desmond to steal Vidic's access pen at some point since his computer reveals some much saucier information. At this point, Lucy's emails don't tell us all that much. They just confirm that Abstergo is definitely shady and absolutely up to something, which we knew already from the kidnapping and the forced reliving of one's ancestors' violent memories. When he sleeps, Desmond has flashes of glowing red symbols, though we don't yet know why they happen or what they are. The next morning, Desmond talks with Vidic before returning to the Animus, and here we start to learn of the eerie parallels between the goals of the Al-Mualim era assassins and the goals of Abstergo, who we soon learn are the modern-day Templars.
You expect me to believe you're building a better tomorrow?
That's exactly what we're doing. The human race calls out for direction. They want to know why they're here, what they're meant to do. Well, we're going to tell them. And once they understand how to live their lives, everything will be better.
Better how?
An end to all conflicts, large and small. Isn't that what you assassins strive for? Peace in all things?
I told you, I'm not an assassin.
Desmond can't really have this argument here because it has to happen between Altair and Al-Mualim at the game's climax, so his "I'm not an assassin" line is a narratively fortuitous end to the conversation. But we're prompted to ask ourselves what really separates these two factions, and by the end of the game it will be Altair's role to articulate where that separation lies. With Desmond back in the Animus, Altair is dispatched to Acre, and one tedious ride through the kingdom later, we arrive at the city of Blue and Gray. Altair's target is running a hospital and experimenting on patients, so after conducting our investigation, we infiltrate his hospital, ready to strike him down. Outside in the courtyard, Garnier confronts a patient that was caught attempting to escape.
Take hold of yourself! Do you think this gives me pleasure? Do you think I want to hurt you? But you leave me no choice.
Similar to the Tamir scene, our target is performing an act of boorish evil just before we strike to remove a lot of the moral ambiguity from what we're doing. But this runs so contrary to the nuances of the game's conflict that I started to look for other reasons why these scenes play out the way that they do. It would almost be more interesting and bring players and Altair closer together if we just had to take Al-Mualim's word for it that these were evil men doing nefarious things, rather than witness an act of obvious evil from them right before we strike to confirm it. It does build on the idea of Templars believing that their supposedly righteous ends justify their cruel means. Tamir thinks killing this merchant will spark fear in the others, causing them to work harder. Garnier believes crippling this man to keep him from escaping will ultimately lead to successful treatment. But I started to notice something else.
Take hold of yourself!
And stay your tongue!
But you leave me no choice.
So you leave me no choice.
I think the game is drawing these sinister connections between Al-Mualim and the men we hunt. We can find these parallels in both their language and their actions. Altair kills Garnier and, like Tamir, hears strange words from the man as he's dying.
But before I close my eyes, I must know what will become of my children.
You mean the people made to suffer your cruel experiments? They'll be free now to return to their homes.
Homes? What homes? The sewers? The brothels? The prisons that we dragged them from?
You took these people against their will.
Yes. What little will there was for them to have. Are you really so naive?
What little will there was for them to have. This is an idea that Al-Mualim brings up during his confrontation with Altair, that people are so disempowered, their lives so ruled by the circumstances of their birth, that it's debatable whether most of them ever even had free will. We're planting those seeds as we go, and while Altair doesn't really have a rebuttal now, he will by the time we fight Al-Mualim in the garden. Speaking of Al-Mualim, he sends us off to kill our next target, a slaver in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is probably the most visually interesting city in the game. Instead of the gold of Damascus or the blue of Acre, we get a soft greenish hue over everything. Not enough to drown the color, like we see in Acre, but enough to mute it just a bit. The skyline is more distinct than Acre or Damascus, and once you're off the crowded main streets, the back streets and alleyways are cramped and winding. It doesn't feel welcoming like Damascus, nor hostile like Acre. Jerusalem is indifferent to Altair. Our target, Talal, is also somewhat indifferent to Altair. He tries to talk with him, thinks that there's a chance Altair might see things from his perspective. In the dark of his warehouse, it's a tense and cinematic experience, and after Altair kills Talal, he gets a crucial piece of the puzzle revealed to him.
The Brotherhood is not so weak that my death will stop its work.
What Brotherhood?
Al-Mualim is not the only one with designs upon the Holy Land. And that's all you'll have from me.
Then we are finished. Beg forgiveness from your god.
He's long abandoned us.
Altair learns that these men are working together in a brotherhood just like his. He also learns that these men believe that there is no god, or if there was, that he's abandoned humanity, making them markedly different from so many other factions during the Third Crusade. The next Al-Mualim wrap-up conversation happens after our act break and another modern-day segment, but it makes more sense to cover it here, just know that I'm fiddling with the order a bit. Returning to Al-Mualim, he congratulates Altair on killing the first 3 men, and rewards him with another item before giving him another 3 names to cross off the list. In doing some research for this video, I was poking around the Assassin's Creed wiki and found the version of this conversation that happens if Altair kills Talal in Jerusalem first, and then finishes the first round of assassinations with Garnier and Acre. According to the wiki, instead of the generic first act wrap-up conversation after killing Talal, Altair says, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna read a transcript rather than replay the exhausting first few hours of this game just to get 20 seconds of footage. I saw them though, the men and women who would be slaves. They were a strange sort, old, mad, sick. Weak, yes. What better way to make a soldier than to take a oh my god.
No, you're putting weird emphasis on weird syllables.
Weak, yes. What better way to make a soldier than to take a broken man and rebuild him? Give him all he's been denied with the promise of more. It seems a lot of work. It is, but what you get in return is loyalty. Knowing what it was they stood to lose, such men would be loath to betray their savior. An interesting theory. I think it's probably for the best that most players tackle Jerusalem last and don't get these lines because they are so on the nose that it undermines a lot of the subtler connections Assassin's Creed makes between Al-Mualim and the men we're killing. It also undermines Altair's intelligence a bit, that he has this whole conversation and never says, hey, what the f***? With his first 3 targets down, Desmond is pulled from the Animus due to apparent overheating. We learn more about Lucy, how Vidic saved her life from Abstergo employees who were going to kill her when they thought she was no longer useful. Desmond also finds access codes to his cell planted inside his dresser. If we thought before that Lucy was probably helping us, we just about confirm it now. And with that, our first act comes to a close, with a newly empowered Desmond ready to double down on his investigation, and Altair starting to have doubts about his targets and the man he calls a mentor. After a sluggish but story-heavy prologue, Assassin's Creed tells its story in short, concentrated bursts in between lengthy gameplay sections, like little bouillon cubes of narrative dispensed with every kill. But the story we do get is fascinatingly abstract and gleefully introspective, and we're planting the seeds for the game's final conflict in a way that usually feels pretty organic. The plotting is not all that sophisticated, and the pacing can be disastrous at times, but once you get to the story it's trying to tell, I think Assassin's Creed is showing some surprising narrative ambition. Now let's see where this goes.
Rise and shine. We've got quite a day ahead of us.
You're in a good mood this morning.
Here we get the most obvious sign of Vidic's evil nature. The sick bastard appears to be a morning person. Vidic also reveals to Desmond that Abstergo has been responsible for almost all of mankind's intellectual, technological, medical, and philosophical progress over the last few years.
To be fair, we don't invent them. We find them.
Find them?
They're gifts, Mr. Miles, from those who came before.
This is one of the biggest revelations from the modern-day storyline, confirmation that there was a precursor race whose technology vastly exceeds humanity's. Like all good mystery box moments, it answers one question but raises multiple others. This is probably where the artifacts come from and probably what Abstergo was searching in Altair's memories to find. But now we don't know who these people were or how they became extinct despite their technological superiority. The Assassin's Creed series, especially in the early days, excelled at asking interesting questions, if only they answered them in satisfying ways. And of course, this isn't limited to Assassin's Creed's puzzle box. Most of these kinds of stories end up messy and underwhelming. The X-Files and Lost both saw fairly steady declines in audience and critical reception. There's a great site that I'll link to in the description that lets you look up graphs of IMDb ratings of specific TV shows and track their movement over time. IMDb ratings are also far from a perfect source. The folks sticking around to watch a show in its 6th or 7th season are also more likely to be fans of said shows, so it's not a perfect reflection of objective quality, but it's interesting to track nonetheless. I loved the first season of Westworld, but that enjoyment was greatly enhanced by the viewing experience. Tracking all the theories and ideas on podcasts and subreddits in between each episode was such a joy. And the first season ended by answering most of our questions and asking a few more. Then things get messy. So starting these mystery box stories, having an introduction that really grabs you is easy. The endings are the hard part. There's even a name that's associated with this kind of unsustainable, mysterious crescendo that causes fans to lose confidence in the overall vision. The Chris Carter effect, Chris Carter being the creator of the X-Files. And what do you know, right down in our examples section, Assassin's Creed.
The first time I did that first game, I got to the end of the script, and in a 4-hour session. I think it took about 2.5 hours, and they said, okay, that's all. They said, all right, thanks, Nolan. We're good. I said, and I turned the last page, and I said, I'm just going to get a cup of coffee, and we'll start up again. And they looked at each other like, oh, that's it. What? This is awesome. What happens? And the writer goes, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, I haven't written it yet.
Nevertheless, I think Assassin's Creed 1 deserves praise for how successful it is in starting this universe, how many creative and interesting questions it raises. The information given to Desmond in this first game is minimal, but by the end, with the Lucy reveal and the Eagle Vision revelations, players suddenly had so many questions and clues to study while they waited for the sequel. And your mileage may vary, but I don't really hold the fact that they don't stick the landing against the earlier work. It is something I still think about, but I still love Season 1 of Westworld. I'll still go back and rewatch older episodes of The X-Files, and honestly, The Force Awakens is one big old mystery box, but it's one of my favorite Star Wars movies.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Desmond steals Vidic's pen before returning to the Animus. This action right here is the most overtly heroic thing he does in the game. Everything else is pretty much handled by Lucy. I like that though. Desmond isn't a traditional video game hero. In this first game, he's just our lens for his world, in much the same way that Altair is Desmond's lens for Altair's world. Back in the Animus, Altair is sent after his next 3 targets, each of whom are serving as a temporary leader in the cities they govern. For this section and the final 3 targets, I know it's sacrilegious, but I always go to Acre first to get it out of the way since it's my least favorite. The gaming equivalent of eating one's green beans before one's potatoes. The William assassination has 2 of my favorite little moments in the game, the first of which is this snippet of conversation that we overhear during our investigation.
Well, the Bible does say God helps those who help themselves.
Nah, it doesn't, actually. That's from one of Aesop's fables. The Bible says quite the opposite, in fact. Many passages of being patient and faithful and waiting for the Lord to decide if he wishes to assist.
Well, I say we've waited long enough.
This is one of the few investigations that feels deliberately written to build on the game's ideas, and if Assassin's Creed had more of these moments, I think its story would have been more effective. This man's misunderstanding of the Bible is proving Amwalim's point at the end of the game, that people aren't really making empowered choices to follow one god or another, but that it's mostly the circumstances of birth that determines one's faith. This person can't really separate religious doctrine from cultural aphorisms. It's a great moment and one of the only times I found the investigation dialogue to be all that interesting. In the bureau before the briefing, the local leader gives Altair a rundown of the situation between William and King Richard. Altair responds with,
I've never been one for politics.
But surely you realize your every action shapes the course of this land's future. You are a politician too, in your own way.
As you wish.
This is such an important line to show Altair's lingering immaturity, and I love that one of the game's wiser characters tries to guide him on this. Altair's life revolves around going from city to city, slaying whichever important person his master tells him to, and yet he sneers dismissively that he's never been one for politics. He's not just emotionally stunted, but this line makes it appear like he's somewhat intellectually stunted as well, and it's a testament to the ambition of his arc that by the time Revelations concludes, he has become one of the wisest men of his time. Also, to be honest, that game feels like it retcons Altair's character a bit. I don't mind, I think we end up in a better place with those changes, but we'll expand on that in another video.
No man should pass from this world without knowing some kindness.
But he shunned your graces.
As was his right.
Without knowing some kindness.
An excellent kill.
His investigation concluded, Altair heads to William's fortress, where he overhears a conversation between his target and the departing King Richard.
3,000 souls, William. I was told they would be held as prisoners and used to barter for the release of our men.
The Saracens would not have honored their end of the bargain. You know this to be true. I did you a favor.
Oh, yes. A great favor indeed. Now our enemies will be that much stronger in their convictions. Fight that much harder.
They're referring to an event that I've seen called the Massacre at Ayadia, or the Massacre of Acre, in which Richard ordered the execution of 2,700 Turkish hostages. Accounts vary on whether the entirety of those executed were soldiers or whether some of them were also non-combatants. It led to a counter-massacre where Saladin ordered 1,600 Christian prisoners to be executed in Damascus. In the fiction of Assassin's Creed, this is something ordered by William that Richard condemns him for. In our history, however, Richard is held responsible. It's an interesting change, and I think it's part of what leads Desmond to asking Vidic about the events he sees in the Animus. That this massacre is mentioned, but not more thoughtfully integrated into the story, feels like a missed opportunity, though I also understand if there were ethical concerns about including it. Were it not handled with immense care, you might lower tragedy into spectacle, and after seeing where this series goes, I'm not sure Ubisoft has the ability or confidence to try to walk that line. Nevertheless, one of my biggest critiques of the game would be that it tells far more than it shows. We're always told that the Crusades are a violent and bloody time, but that's not exactly something we encounter or are challenged with in the story. The human consequences of the Crusade are clumsily conveyed through the setting. We assume that the people of Acre are suffering in the city because it looks like this. But when you take such a minimalist, dispassionate approach towards conveying the despair and violence that's so central to your main plot, it becomes too easy to ignore, too easy to just keep seeing this world, these cities, as playgrounds because functionally they are. On our 3 trips to these cities, we never really meet anyone that makes them feel real, never really see or hear something that makes us consider the thousands of people that are trying to eke out a living under the roofs we dash across. Neither Altair nor the player really encounter any characters that wrench the Crusades down from the abstract, that force us to grapple with the personal, life-shattering consequences of a conflict of this scale. As a result, the peace that both the Assassins and Templars are fighting for feels less urgent. Al-Mualim's temptation to wield the apple to force peace feels easier to condemn. And we see an immediate course correction in Assassin's Creed 2. There is life, there is emotion, and empathy to that story and its characters that give it a giant beating heart that AC1 just lacks.
What news, Altair?
But I think a more instructive comparison is actually the series' soft reboot, Assassin's Creed Origins. Like Assassin's Creed 1, Origins is hugely ambitious but has massive structural issues that could have completely undermined its main quest. But throughout his lengthy, confusing journey, Bayek is frequently interacting with interesting and grounded characters that help give everything in the story human stakes. That game has no idea what it's doing in its main story, but there are still moments in it that hit as hard as any in the series because they let things get personal. Not everything is a sterile crossing of blades. Through its dialogue and characters, Origins grounds the player in Egypt in a way that AC1 doesn't with the players and the Holy Land. And that has consequences. While it deserves respect for its ambition and the groundwork it lays for future games, Assassin's Creed 1 rarely makes you feel anything. Its provocations are intellectual. What are we willing to sacrifice for peace? And is free will more valuable than order? But largely weightless, because we're rarely feeling the consequences of war, the cost of the ongoing violence. If someone just watched the dozen or so conversations between Al-Mualim and Altair, they would come away with an almost identical experience of the game's story as someone who spent hours running through Damascus, Acre, and Jerusalem. And to me, that's indicative of how much potential is wasted. An effective story isn't ingesting 10 bouillon cubes of narrative over the course of a few hours. It's slowly, deliberately building something thoughtful, something orchestrated, disparate parts gradually coming together to form something bigger. Assassin's Creed gives you bouillon cubes when it could have given you an intricate, skillfully simmered soup. Maybe I'm just hungry. Returning to Acre and to William, this revelation about the massacre of Acre is an example of how Assassin's Creed plays with history. These moments tend to be fairly subtle in the early games, and I think we peak in absurdity with Assassin's Creed 3. In AC1 and the Ezio trilogy, the most consistent departure from history is how fixated citizens appear to be with spending hours of their lives on miscellaneous benches. Okay, so I originally wrote this joke and then made a note to myself to get some good B-roll of benches for that objectively hilarious montage. But after doing some research on the history of benches, there seemed to be a lot of scholarship on outdoor benches, particularly in Florence, which I wanted to talk about here because I don't know when I'm going to be talking about Assassin's Creed 2 and I would probably forget, which might have been for the best. I'll link it in the description, but this essay by Yvonne Illet is really well written and goes into fascinating detail about Florentine benches and even includes a decent amount of historical sketches or paintings that feature benches in the background. I've pulled through the most pertinent passages from their essay, but if this piques your interest at all, I encourage you to give the full article a read. The Medici were the most notable, if not the first, of several Florentine patrons to incorporate a grandiose stone bench into their facade. This was in part a monumentalization of a vernacular element, but more important, the Medici and other prominent palace builders appropriated the element characteristic of the civic center as part of a strategy to designate their homes as new centers of civic authority. Many Florentine patricians were quick to pick up on this innovation, whether as a desire to keep up with the Medici as a statement of alliance or a challenge to Cosimo's increasing power. If distinguished citizens discussing noble topics was the ideal, in reality the benches were frequented by the assorted patricians and plebeians, and they chatted, gossiped, and argued about politics. Contemporary accounts illustrate that a disparate group of people mingled on the Florentine benches. Patricians, lowlifes, learned men, idlers, old men, young men, artists, clerics, and miscellaneous citizens figure in these stories. Which, there's a lot of really crappy stuff about the world today, the planet's slowly dying, and goddamn if your check engine light doesn't always seem to come on at the worst time. But we also live in a world where within minutes you can find an eminently readable and exquisitely researched essay on the role of benches in historic Florence. And I don't know, things could be worse. 2023's got some things going for it. So benches, pretty important in historic Florence, and are closely related to the period's evolving politics. I cannot, however, find any information about public seating in the Holy Land during the Third Crusade, which means the snarky bench montage is here to stay. Infiltrating the fortress is quite fun.
This is a betrayal on levels that no one's ever seen!
Infiltrating the fortress for a second time is still pretty fun. When Altair finally lands a killing blow, William, much like his other victims, alludes to much more complex motivations than typical greed or ambition. Back at Masyaf, Altair brings us up to Al-Mualim, his doubts about his master and the creed growing.
Though they do not admit it directly, there is a tie that binds them. I'm sure of it.
There is a difference, Altair, between what we are told to be true and what we see to be true. Most men do not bother to make the distinction. It is simpler that way. But as an assassin, it is your nature to notice, to question.
Then what is it that connects these men?
But as an assassin, it is also your duty to still these thoughts and trust in your master. For there can be no true peace without order, and order requires authority.
You speak in circles, Master.
I don't really know what to feel about this part. It's written to be somewhat of a paradox. Always question everything, just, don't question me. Al-Mualim's line, "It is also your duty to still these thoughts and trust in your master, for there can be no true peace without order," is kind of equating order with obedience. It's consistent with what we'll come to understand as the Templar ideology, and thus fitting for a man who secretly shares it. I'm just surprised this isn't a conflict that's happened between Al-Mualim and his assassins before. How one of them hasn't sat down and gone, was Al-Mualim's fixation on peace at all costs really that different to the goals of Tamir or Garnier or any of the other men I killed? What if our fixations on creeds and universal truths were actually blinding us? Maybe it's time I got myself ass out of the assassins. With William dead, Altair turns to his next target, the merchant king of Damascus. Damascus is effulgent, particularly after the gasping streets of Acre. Damascus is notable in how peace has allowed the city to keep flourishing. It's almost an effective reminder of what Altair thinks he's fighting for, an end to the war so that all cities may look like this, peace in all things. The Merchant King is hosting a party that Altair crashes, but like all things Templar in this game, Abul's last moments tend to be dedicated to violence of some kind, in this case, poison. He decries the war and the rich attendees of his party who profit from it before his scheme is revealed.
No. All this suffering is born of fear and hate. It bothers you that they are different, just as it bothers you that I am different. Compassion, mercy, tolerance. These words mean nothing to any of you. mean nothing to those infidel invaders who ravage our land in search of gold and glory. And so I say, enough! I've pledged myself to another cause, one that will bring about a new world in which all people might live side by side in peace. A pity none of you will live to see it.
It's a great little moment of drama, and if Assassin's Creed 1 had full synchronization objectives, I would be curious to see if Ubisoft would consider Altair saving these guests to be a desired additional objective. You can climb the walls and take out the archers massacring the guests before you strike, and I do, but I also don't think that's something that Altair would necessarily prioritize. His creed tells him to stay his blade from the flesh of the innocent, but we've seen Altair ignore the death of innocents when convenient to him before, and we'll see it again before the game is over.
Look at me. My very nature is an affront to the people I ruled, and these noble robes did little more than to muffle their shouts of hate.
When I was younger, I thought his references to being different or being considered an abomination was just because he was ugly. You know, he's a Damascus 3, but an Ocker 6. Of course, now I think it's pretty obvious he's referring to his sexuality, and it sounds like it was part of what drew him to Robert's Templars, that they were building a new world. He's still not exactly pitiable, but the confession is enough to provoke Altair into confronting Al-Mualim when he returns to Masyaf. And here we get one of the most important interactions between the two of them.
Each man I'm sent to kill speaks cryptic words to me. Each time I come to you and ask for answers. Each time you give only riddles in exchange, but no more.
Who are you to say no more?
I'm the one who does the killing. If you want it to continue, you'll speak straight with me for once.
Tread carefully, boy. I do not like your tone.
And I do not like your deception.
I have offered you a chance to restore your lost honor.
Not lost. Taken. By you. And then you've sent me to fetch it again like some damn dog.
It seems I'll need to find another.
I love that Altair finally calls Al-Mualim out on the charade of restoring his honor. Again, however petulant and arrogant Altair is at the start of the game, he's a young man that's been raised by this brotherhood, mentored by Al-Mualim. His moral and practical failings are, at least partially, the fault of Al-Mualim. While he's quickly talked down by Altair, the fact that Al-Mualim is willing to kill him simply for asking questions about the men he kills is revealing of his character. Al-Mualim's discipline doesn't stem from justice, it stems from control. We saw that in the prologue, and we're seeing flashes of it here. It's a very Templary impulse, even though Altair doesn't know enough about their order to know that yet. Al-Mualim does reveal to Altair the answer to the mystery we've been investigating all game. What is it that binds all of these seemingly disparate figures together?
Templars.
Now you see the true reach of Robert de Sable.
All of these men, leaders of cities, commanders of armies.
All pledge allegiance to his cause.
Their works are not meant to be viewed on their own, are they? But as a whole, what do they desire?
Conquest. They seek the Holy Land not in the name of God, but for themselves.
That's right. The people we've been fighting all game are the same people we've been fighting all game. I don't know why this is treated like the big mystery, and I think most players will be confused as to why this is a big revelation to Altair. I think a similar atmosphere could have been achieved if we knew from the start we were targeting Templar operatives, but we were uncovering their motives and their philosophy bit by bit. Instead, the story of the first half of this game is just men dying while saying, "There's so much you don't understand." And then when the big reveal happens, it turned out that most of us probably thought that's who we've been killing all along. If you remember playing this game back when it came out, I'd be curious to hear how this revelation worked for you. It's the poor execution here, combined with a somewhat logic-defying, Al-Mualim was actually part of the secret Templars, not these ones apparently, and nobody from his assassins noticed or asked him why he was gone all the time, or mentioned any clues that might indicate this twist. And when the apple was discovered, he wanted it for himself, so he leaves the order, tells Altair to get it, and then strips him of his rank to use him as his own private spirit of vengeance, and nobody mentions this to Altair until Robert. That keeps this game from really being great. Were this mystery handled more deftly, I think this game would be talked about in the same breath as its sequels. Instead, we're left with a sloppy narrative experience that ends up asking a lot of great questions of both the player and Altair. It just could have been so much more. With the Merchant King of Damascus felled, Altair ventures to Jerusalem to find his next target. I really enjoy the continuation of Altair and Malik's slightly prickly dynamic, and here we see Malik start to soften just a little as he notices Altair maturing.
I suggest you plan your attack carefully. Get to better know your prey.
With your help, I will. Where would you have me begin my search?
What's this? You're actually asking for my assistance instead of demanding it. I'm impressed.
I wish we spent more time with these two characters. As it stands now, their relationship kind of flows through Malik's 4 different greetings for Altair.
Safety and peace, Malik.
Your presence here deprives me of both.
Safety and peace, Malik.
Were that the city was possessed of either. Safety and peace, Altair.
Upon you as well, brother. Safety and peace, my friend.
Your presence here will deliver us both.
Malik is interesting because he's a great foil to Altair. He's a kind of poster child of the Al-Mualim-era assassins. He follows the creed to a T and never questions his mentor, and while it leads to success in the game's prologue, we'll come to see the fallibility in that line of thinking. Malik wouldn't have been able to discover Al-Mualim's treachery and fight back against him were it not for Altair. I just wish he had more than 5 minutes of screen time. This is a dynamic that we never really revisit in this series, the rival assassin of a similar age and rank to our main character. I think Syndicate tries this, but because their even being in London is in defiance of the Brotherhood, they're always more exasperated allies than rivals. During the investigation, Altair overhears 2 men discussing the injustice in Jerusalem. Majadin, our next target, has taken the son of one of the men and is planning to execute him.
I am sorry, Ahmad. It came without warning.
My son? They have my son? What is to be done with him?
We did everything we could.
What is to be done with him?
He's to be executed. Today.
No, I won't allow it.
I really like this beat, and it only takes a few minutes of game time to pay off. When it comes time to strike, we can see the 2 men in the crowd.
This is not justice!
You've no right to do that! Who do you take?
And all of you stand idle, complicit in this crime.
God curse you all!
See how the evil of one man spreads to corrupt others? They sought to instill fear and doubt within you, but I will keep you safe. Here now are 4 filled with sin. The harlot, the thief, the gambler, the heretic. Let God's judgment be brought down upon them all!
I like the staging of the scene, the obvious stakes involved in our successful assassination. Like the other missions, I tried to be reasonably stealthy and join the group of scholars near the stage, but this strange fellow had other plans for me. In pretty much all of these games, except maybe Assassin's Creed Unity, the combat is so easy that attempting to play in a stealthy manner is almost a courtesy and a mercy to the city guards, because if they catch you being a miscreant and things escalate, it never ends well for them. Part of the allure of stealth is that it feels cooler. It's more of a challenge. Open combat in these games just reminds me of that heavily memed panel from a Star Wars comic, where rebel soldiers have Vader surrounded and he says, "All I am surrounded by is fear and dead men," as he ignites his lightsaber, which is very much the energy Altair or Ezio have if they're ever surrounded in these games. So, in what I think is my only non-stealthy assassination of the game, I let Altair sloppily duel his way through half of the Jerusalem Guard before striking the final blow against Majadin. Even though I didn't exactly plan this approach, it felt more overtly heroic, and in being discovered so early, all the prisoners ended up escaping with their lives. Maj is different than the other men we've killed. There isn't a cool logic to him. He's just a violent, evil man, corrupted by the first real power he's ever experienced.
You'd kill people simply for believing differently than you.
Of course not. I killed them because I could. Because it was fun. Do you know what it feels like to determine another man's fate? And did you see the way the people cheered? The way they feared me? I was like a god. You'd have done the same if you could. Such power.
The corrupting nature of power is an idea that I think we explore in a much more compelling way with Al-Mualim, so I don't mind that Majadin's confessional feels a little weightless. It does amplify the Templar threat, however. These aren't all ambitious men working towards what they believe is humanity's brightest future. Sometimes this is an order that attracts and empowers cruel, sadistic people desperately seeking any path to power. This series takes that idea and runs with it with Cesare's character in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Desmond is pulled from the Animus as an increasingly exasperated Vidic is wrapping up a phone call. Lucy tells Desmond that the assassins are coming for him, and then we get this little exchange.
That little fight your ancestors started during the Third Crusade, it never ended. You're being held by Templars.
Vidic's a Templar?
There's no way you could have known. They hide it so well.
There's no way you could have known. They hide it so well.
As she leaves, we get another very obvious hint from her to do some snooping.
I'm sorry, Desmond. I have to go. You should turn in for the night. The answers to all of your questions are right in front of you. You just have to know where to look.
When Desmond sneaks out that night, we can finally go through Vidic's computer. You can read updates about the increasingly mundane apocalypse, references to hurricane season, a massive African plague, mass migrations, Antarctic drilling, and a Templar satellite launch happening on December 21st, 2012, only a few months from when this game takes place. And then, extremely poorly hidden at the top of his deleted items folder, we find an email referencing a metal ball that can influence people's minds. Our second act ends with several pieces falling into place. We've confirmed that Abstergo is a front for the modern-day Templars, and Altair has learned that the men he's been hunting across the Holy Land all belong to the Templar Order. We've also introduced some nice dramatic irony. Desmond knows about the apple before Altair does. Knowing what the apple is capable of, and knowing the dangerous man who currently wields it, we enter the Animus in our third act with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. This is gonna get a little messy. After a plodding first couple of acts, Assassin's Creed saves its best for last. Back in the Animus, Desmond and the player can only watch the latest conversation between Altair and Anwalim with a growing sense of dread. For the first time all game, Anwalim is openly wielding the apple, clutching it to his chest with both hands when not moving. When we saw the apple back in the game's introduction, it was housed within an ornate golden shell. Here, its true shape is revealed, a surprisingly mundane-looking metal ball. Al-Mualim tells Altair that the Templars want to control the Holy Land, but that their plans were contingent on their possessing the apple.
What is this treasure?
It is temptation.
It's just a piece of silver.
Look at it.
What am I supposed to see?
This piece of silver cast out Adam and Eve. It turned staves into snakes, parted and closed the Red Sea. Eris used it to start the Trojan War, and with it a poor carpenter turned water into wine.
It seems rather plain for all the power you claim it has. How does it work?
He who holds it commands the hearts and minds of whoever looks upon it, whoever tastes of it, as they say.
I love this exchange and the questions it raises. Is Al-Mualim trying to use it on Altair now? If so, how is Altair able to resist it? Is this specific artifact what the Templars are using Desmond to find? Then we learn that the apple is responsible for so many historical and religious events. The exile of Adam and Eve, the parting of the Red Sea, the Trojan War, and of course, the poor carpenter that turned water to wine. Stepping back from the text for a moment, we can observe the genius of Ubisoft's decision to make this mysterious object an apple. Right away, it has two close ties to prominent moments in Christian and Greek mythology, and helps ground this artifact and this in-universe idea of a precursor civilization. We'll revisit the Christian half when we look at the final confrontation, which has some pretty obvious allusions to Eden, but if you're not familiar with the Apple of Discord from Greek myth, I wanted to touch on it a bit here to show just how well these mythologies line up. Often cited as the source of the Trojan War, this whole situation with an apple began when Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, is not invited to a wedding because, you know, the whole strife and discord thing, and decides that the best way to handle this was to, you guessed it, cause a little strife and discord.
I am going to create an environment that is so toxic.
Depending on the story, she either crashes the wedding anyway, bearing a golden apple, or she chucks it in from the outside. In most versions of the story, inscribed on the apple is a version of "To the Fairest One." 3 goddesses fight over the apple: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. They turn to Zeus for his judgment, and Zeus, exhibiting a rare bit of common sense, doesn't want to get in the middle of this. Perhaps less responsibly, rather than attempting to squash this debate, he tells them to go ask the Trojan mortal Paris. They do, each offers a bribe, and Paris chooses Aphrodite, who had promised him the most beautiful girl in the world, which turns out to be Helen, who just so happened to be married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Paris takes Helen anyway, starting the Trojan War, yada yada yada. Odysseus has the idea to build a big old wooden horse, and Troy is eventually sacked. In the recontextualized version of the story that we get here in Assassin's Creed, it seems like the implication is that Eris directly wields the apple to start the war, at least knowing how the apple works. If she just threw it in like she did in the myth, wouldn't her fellow goddesses find it knowing what it is, and thus be able to access its power? Instead of fighting over the title of the fairest, it would be a scuffle to possess a powerful artifact. I think we revisit this in a glyph in Assassin's Creed 2, though I'm not sure we get any firm answers there either. But this tiny line from Al-Mualim seems to confirm the existence of the Greek gods, though perhaps not as history knows them, and really drives home the power of the apple. Its wielding sparked one of the biggest conflicts in mythology, and now it's being hunted by Templars in 2 different eras, and presently being guarded by a man who's already shown flashes of an inner darkness that's not dissimilar from the men we've killed. It's such a tiny line in a huge game, but it's important that we credit Ubisoft for blending science fiction, history, and myth into something that, in the early games at least, feels grounded, feels plausible, because it's that element that captivated so many fans at the time of release. The gameplay is fine, the cities are a marvel, but the secret sauce, the je ne sais quoi to tie it all together, was the surprising depth of this new mythos they were building. A mythos that rewarded existing knowledge, incentivized historical and mythological curiosity, and provided answers to old questions while prompting us to ask new ones. We now know what the apple can do, for example, but we have a dozen more questions. Wait, are the Greek gods real? What do the modern-day Templars want with it? Is this connected to their upcoming satellite launch? Is Al-Mualim using the apple already? Are there others like it? A few of those questions will be answered by the time the credits roll, so let's set off our Akar to slay the first of our final 3 targets. With 6 men already dead by our hand, the city guard are on high alert, and you can feel that in the gameplay. Altair is pushed to the rooftops more than ever to avoid the massive patrols of the city guard, and the archers lining so many roofs make getting to viewpoints occasionally challenging for the first time all game. It adds to the climactic atmosphere we're seeing and feeling the consequences of our actions. It's an idea manifested even more prominently once we arrive at the harbor after our investigation to see Sabrand, our target, tormenting a scholar, believing the man to be an assassin. It's a striking scene, and like so many other moments in the game, Altair doesn't step forward when he could. He doesn't step into the role of a traditional hero, even here towards the end of his arc. I don't mean that as a criticism either. One of the things that makes Altair and his brotherhood so interesting in this first game is that they're not really an altruistic force. In this game, there's no real arc for Altair there, but in subsequent games, our assassins are rarely put in situations where they must choose between saving innocent people or staying in the shadows to increase their chances of killing their target. So much of how the assassins change and why is attributed to Altair, but almost all of that evolution happens off-screen, and we really only experience it as Ezio through dialogue and codex pages. From Ezio's Brotherhood onward, the assassins tend to have a general do-gooder impulse about them, but unless I'm misremembering things, it's rarely tested against their duties as assassins. Navigating through the harbor, Altair boards Sabrand's ship and takes him down. Sabrand is scared, and Altair tries to comfort him.
Don't do this.
You are afraid.
Of course I am afraid.
But you'll be safe now, held in the arms of your god.
Sabrand goes on to tell Altair that nothing is waiting, something that Altair should probably know by this point in the narrative, so I almost think this is more of a final confirmation for players that weren't paying attention to the conversations with Al-Mualim. Most notable is Altair's growing compassion and wisdom. In both the post-kill confessionals and the conversations with the bureau leaders, we're seeing a calmer, more thoughtful man. I wish his maturing was something we explored a little more than just he's less angry now and he talks a little more gently, but Assassin's Creed 2 takes that kind of arc and does something ambitious and wonderful with it, so maybe it's for the best that we keep it on a back burner in this game. Returning to Al-Mualim, Altair asks again about the men he's killing before Al-Mualim ends the conversation by prompting this little exchange.
Before you go, I have a question for you.
Of course.
What is the truth?
We place faith in ourselves. We see the world the way it really is, and hope that one day all mankind might see the same.
What is the world, then?
An illusion. One which we can either submit to, as most do, or transcend.
What is it to transcend?
To recognize nothing is true and everything is permitted. That laws arise not from divinity but reason. I understand now that our creed does not command us to be free. It commands us to be wise.
Do you see now why the Templars are a threat?
Whereas we would dispel the illusion, they would use it to rule.
It's fascinating to me that Ubisoft had the confidence to make so much of this game's main conflict intellectual and philosophical rather than something more straightforward. And I respect their ambition, and yet, I don't know, these lines here.
What is the world, then? An illusion. One which we can either submit to, as most do, or transcend. What is it to transcend? To recognize nothing is true and everything is permitted. That laws arise not from divinity but reason.
This part specifically feels a little sophomoric for my taste, and I think it revolves around the way they use the term, the world. The world is an illusion, and by accepting that nothing is true and everything is permitted, we transcend it. This third act especially is going to become all about illusions, mostly stemming from the Piece of Eden. So this little conversation addressing the broader, more mundane but equally dangerous illusion of theologically driven laws and hegemonic forces that rule without reason is interesting and connects with our broader themes. But especially with the pace of these conversations, I think it's too easy to just hear that line and think like this kind of illusion instead of this kind of illusion. This is a huge, defining moment of the Creed and Altair, and we whiz past it with language that's unspecific enough to probably confuse a decent number of players. Then there's the,
I understand now that our creed does not command us to be free. It commands us to be wise.
I alluded to this earlier, but a creed that presupposes wisdom is always going to be somewhat flawed. It's taken Altair over 25 years of his life to come to this understanding, which I think is more of a condemnation of the Creed and Al-Mualim than it is of Altair. The Creed doesn't explicitly command them to be wise, that's just Altair's interpretation, and the fact that there are so many darker interpretations of those words feels like a recipe for disaster when your order is largely built from misfits and broken people. Interpretations can be lost or drowned out by louder, more dangerous voices. And that can be an issue, especially in a game that decries religion as part of the illusion. One thing it doesn't address is how to replace the moral framework of religion if everyone were to transcend the illusion. To be clear, this is not a we wouldn't know right from wrong were it not for religion argument. That's not an idea that I personally find all that compelling or persuasive. But for both good and ill, throughout history, religion has been a powerful force to instill and reinforce social and moral frameworks. And the assassins saying, "It's all an illusion, transcend, brother," may be technically correct, but the current iteration of the Creed is too open to misunderstanding to effectively and safely replace religion and current ideas of divinity as a pillar of society without massive destabilization. Altair is an example of how someone can think they're following the Creed, yet be led astray anyway, and by the game's end, Al-Mualim will reveal himself as a man who believes the world needs something else. It's part of the paradox at the heart of the assassins in this game that in order to gather the power they'd need to liberate the world, to try to help everyone transcend as they have, they would likely need to resort to tactics similar to the Templars. And after Altair stopped Al-Mualim, we ensure that they never will. By being so fixated on protecting free will, they're never able to amass the power required to emancipate the masses. And yet that kind of ends up being the point of this game, even though we're left to come to that conclusion on our own. The Assassin's Creed and the people who follow it need to change. They can't live in a fortress in a rigidly structured brotherhood that demands obedience while also extolling the virtues of free will. They're too like their enemy. In future games, Templars will bring up time and time again that the world needs order, needs guidance, and we never get the chance to see if they're wrong. They're usually so successful in their efforts that for the rest of time, assassins are barely holding on, doing just enough to balance the scales. We never really zoom out enough to explore this from a macro level, this fascinating push and pull between these two ideologies, because Ubisoft hasn't shown us a prolonged period of assassin victory. We're left to assume that we're witnessing a modified Hegelian dialectic played out over centuries, the push and pull between assassin and Templar ideology that gradually forms a new society. And then the battle begins again. But this is why I find this game and the early games in this series so compelling. Even if their execution falters at times, the questions they're raising and the themes we play around with are fascinating. And when you couple that with the gorgeous settings and what at the time was a compelling mystery in the modern day, it's so good. It's so good. Altair makes for Damascus, with only one target left before Robert. In a story that is so deeply entrenched in intellectual and ideological conflicts, having our penultimate target be a book-burning zealot is quite fitting. Like the Sabrand assassination, the guards are on high alert and the city is trickier to navigate as a result. The level design just keeps getting more interesting the later we get into the game. It's in this last third of the game that Assassin's Creed really finds its footing from a gameplay perspective, confident enough in its systems and its world to try to challenge the player. In this case, one of the big wrinkles is to have multiple possible targets. Joubert, like all of the other men we've slain, gets a short cutscene to introduce himself, and like so many of our other targets, he commits an act of Disney villain evil to crank up the saturation on our morally gray world.
You love your precious writings? You'd do anything for them?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Then join them!
Any man who speaks as he is just as much a threat. Do any else among you wish to challenge me?
If players are tracking details, in this scene you can see that Joubert has a bit of a fanny pack situation going on, while his fellow scholars don't, so you can locate the real one that way. Players who also completed all of the investigations will have clues revealing where the real Joubert is likely to be. But the most foolproof way for Altair is to use eagle vision, in one of the only times all game when it's actually somewhat useful. After finding him, killing him proves rather easy, and the two have this exchange.
Why? Why have you done this?
Men must be free to do what they believe. It is not our right to punish one for thinking what they do, no matter how much we disagree.
Then what?
You of all people should know the answer. Educate them. Teach them right from wrong. It must be knowledge that frees them, not force.
While admirable, there is an intense naivete to this philosophy, but it's to AC's credit, characters within this series, usually Templars, will point that out multiple times. We'll even hear this idea criticized from Al-Mualim before the game is done. It's not a logical outlook for Altair, it's a philosophy steeped in his desire to be good and to protect people's free will so that they may also choose goodness. And it's lofty and messy, but that's what makes it the perfect opposition to the calculating and often cruel approach of the Templars. Virtue is often illogical, something we'll revisit in the garden with Al-Mualim. Desmond is aroused from the Animus after this, in time to overhear a conversation between Vidic and another Templar off-screen.
Not a lot of time, Vidic.
Understand there's a narrow launch window.
Wherever it's hidden, time to retrieve it.
Working on it.
And when it's done,
he'll be taken care of.
It's a conversation he's clearly not supposed to have overheard, and he asks Lucy about it.
I think there's a problem with the Animus.
Nope, it's working fine.
I'm pretty sure it just ejected me
I'm
when
pretty sure you should shut up.
I like this moment because if we separate who Lucy becomes in the sequels, a very stabby and confident assassin, from her characterization in this game, and just take her on this game's terms, this act is pretty heroic for her. At this point, she's only been characterized as this brilliant but quiet subordinate to Vidic, so this act of minor rebellion is heroic by her standards. She tells Desmond that they have to find a way to stop the Templars, that they're going to try to change everything. And on the off chance players don't pay attention during this conversation, you can read her extremely conspicuous emails, in which everything is put in all caps so you know it's serious business. This is one area where the modern day mystery really falls flat for me, though I suppose if we factor in Brotherhood's big twist, we can look at this as manufactured evidence to have Desmond grow to trust Lucy, which would be fine if that twist was sufficiently woven into the story of the first few games. I'm sure we'll look at it with more scrutiny when we get there, but it's a moment that never worked for me. Desmond asks if they're using him to find the Piece of Eden. Lucy confirms it, but there's a twist. They already found the one at Masyaf, but it was destroyed in the accident in Denver. They're hoping to find from Altair where other artifacts might be. It's a good mystery box moment. Our questions are answered, but now we have new ones. How many more artifacts are there? Are they all like the apple? What were the Templars doing that managed to destroy the original one? Sneaking out that night, Desmond finds emails to Lucy from the assassins that connect the Templar satellite launch with their hunt for the apple. They want to use the satellites to amplify the apple's reach. Bum, bum, bum. We've clarified the stakes for the modern-day storyline. Abstergo is already a corporate behemoth too powerful to be easily stopped by anyone, let alone the fractured assassins. But if they succeed in securing an additional Piece of Eden, then the war these two factions have been fighting for centuries will finally be over. The Templars will have won. Freedom would be eradicated in the pursuit of a world without chaos. The next morning, Desmond and Vidic have what I think is their second to last morning conversation of the game.
Look, I know you're not gonna let me leave. So why not tell me what's going on? Humor me.
I'm not an idiot, Mr. Miles. I think you've already learned quite a bit.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course not.
Having just learned of the Templars' dangerous and ambitious plans, I like that this moment restores Vidic's villainous credibility a bit. He's probably noticed his pen is missing, maybe noticed his chair turned in the wrong direction, but at this point he knows Desmond isn't going to make it out of this lab alive, so he doesn't really care. After that exchange, Desmond asks about the historical inaccuracies in the Animus, and this time Vidic humors him.
Anyone can write a book, and they can put whatever they want on its pages. Anything. Used to be, we thought the world was flat.
Some people still do.
Yes, and they publish books about it. Or that the moon landing was a hoax. I believe there's also a book claims the world was created in 7 days. A bestseller, too.
History, religion, academia, it's all connected to the perpetual construction of what the assassins would call the illusion. But it's not a structured illusion. It's not a shadowy backroom hegemonic orchestration, not yet at least, because that's essentially the Templars' ultimate goal. To replace the chaos and the misinformation of the modern world with something cleaner, more orderly, their own version of the truth. And it's going to be up to the assassins to stop them. They do try to stop them, right? We don't just spend 12 games sort of playing in the margins and then mostly ignore the modern day entirely, resolving the majority of its storyline in comic books that the vast majority of players don't read. We definitely wouldn't do that and then never find a way to summarize those occurrences in-game for players who just play the games, right? Right?
It's okay.
No. Oh my god! Oh my god!
Future games that show us an expanded Templar order will probably give us cause to touch on Antonio Gramsci's work on cultural hegemonies and the way it's been incorporated in literary criticism, because it's really interesting and fits alongside a lot of AC's themes. But in this first game, Abstergo and the historic Templars are single-minded enough in their goal that we can probably kick that can down the road a scooch. For now, it's back to the Animus for our last friendly chat with Al-Mualim before we're sent off to Jerusalem to take down Robert. While Al-Mualim's betrayal still really doesn't work for me, on a first playthrough, I think this moment is effective in making it feel like we're riding to Jerusalem for the end of the game.
The peace of Eden is temptation given form. Merely look at what it's done to Robert. Once he tasted of its power, the thing consumed him. He saw not a dangerous weapon to be destroyed, but a tool. One that would help him realize his life's ambition.
He dreamed of power then?
Yes and no. He dreamed, still dreams, like us, of peace.
But this is a man who sought to see the Holy Land consumed by war.
No, Altair. How can you not see when you're the one that opened my eyes to this?
What do you mean?
What do he and his followers want? A world in which all men are united. I do not despise his goal. I share it. But I take issue with the means. Peace is something to be learned, to be understood, to be embraced.
He would force it.
And rob us of our free will in the process.
This seemingly locks our conflict for our climax. Kill Robert to keep him from getting a piece of Eden, and in doing so, preserve the free will of those in the Holy Land. Our stakes are made fairly clear, our core conflict regurgitated, and now Altair is off. And building that sense of climax is clever because it makes the subversion with Robert and Al-Mualim feel structurally better at least, if not narratively so. It's also interesting that Al-Mualim labels the apple as temptation given form, and says that part about
merely look at what it's done to Robert. Once he tasted of its power, the thing consumed him.
This idea comes up after the Garnier assassination, but I wanted to wait to cover it here. We're supposed to understand that the Templars have possessed the apple before. Clearly Robert had it at some point. Garnier was trying to replicate its effects by experimenting on patients with drugs, so clearly they knew something of its effects. But if that's the story Assassin's Creed is telling, the way the opening scene under the temple in Jerusalem plays out is so poorly executed that it undermines this entire plot. In that sequence, the apple is built into the Ark of the Covenant, which itself is sitting high up in the ruins, with scaffolding sort of going up to where it's sitting. Robert literally says,
I want us through this gate before sunrise. The sooner we possess it, the sooner we can turn our attention to those jackals at Masyaf. The sooner we possess it,
implying that they don't already possess it. If they did, why would they keep it here, relatively exposed and unguarded? If it really was temptation given form, 10 men would not have the strength of will to just leave it there for all that time. I don't know if I'm just missing something or if this game went through some serious rewrites at some point, but if we just look at the text of the game without any of the retconning that future games will try, it just doesn't really function. It's still interesting, still successful in giving us a compelling clash of competing ideologies, but there are just these key moments that don't work the way they need to in the story. The timeline of the apple doesn't make sense, and the Templar twist halfway through the game doesn't really work either. When Altair explains the Templar Order to Malik at the Bureau, he makes it sound like they're the same organization as the historical one.
Crusaders and Saracens working together?
They are none of these things, but something else. Templars.
The Templars are a part of the Crusader army.
Or so they'd like King Richard to believe. No, their only allegiance is to Robert de Sable and some mad idea that they will stop the war.
You spin a strange tale.
Indeed he does, Malik, because if that's the case, why all the secrecy surrounding the targets in the first place? The confessionals of the first 4 or 5 targets are just dedicated to the whole, oh ho ho, you have no idea how deep this goes. But it turns out actually, yes, we really sort of did. Y'all raided our cute little castle at the start of the game, and I've been killing you as a side objective ever since the world opened up. Malik and Altair are getting along much better now that Altair has grown up a bit. And I love this dynamic, I just wish we got more of it. Before the assassination, Altair finally apologizes for his behavior at the temple in the start of the game, and Malik is gracious in his acceptance.
All this time, I never told you I was sorry. Too damn proud. You lost your arm because of me. Lost Qadar. You had every right to be angry.
I do not accept your apology.
I understand.
No. You don't. I do not accept your apology because you are not the same man who went with me into Solomon's temple. And so you have nothing to apologize for.
It's a nice moment and the most obvious example of Altair's emotional growth, and it's pivotal that it happens here because these two need to work in tandem to save the Brotherhood, and it's Malik's new faith in Altair that lets that happen. The funeral Robert is attending is heavily guarded, and if Altair uses eagle vision on the approach, you can notice there's no gold figure like there normally is. Something is wrong.
As you know, this man was murdered. We have tried to track his killer, but it has proved difficult. These creatures cling to the shadows and run from any who would face them fairly. But not today, for it seems one stands among us. He mocks us with his presence and must be made to pay. Seize him! Bring him forward, that God's justice might be done!
It's a fun inversion of what we've been experiencing all game. This time, Altair is the target. With the rest of the guards slain, Altair turns his attention to the strangely small and feminine-sounding Robert, who, during the confessional window, is revealed to be a woman.
What sorcery is this?
This woman, I don't think we learn her name in this game, but we'll later learn that it's Maria, reveals Robert's new goal, and it's a clever one.
Robert rides for Arthur to plead his case that Saracen and Crusader unite against the assassins.
That will never happen. They have no reason to.
Had, perhaps. But now you've given them one. 9, in fact. The bodies you've left behind, victims on both sides. You've made the assassins an enemy in common and ensured the annihilation of your entire order. Well done.
I love this moment. All game we've been dealing with the small consequences of our actions. After killing Garnier, there are more mentally ill people on the streets. After the second wave of assassinations, all the guards are on high alert. We've seen scholars be attacked on the off chance they're assassins, and here is a much more significant consequence: the unification of Christian and Saracen against the assassins. And in our assassination of politically important figures, we've left a bit of a power vacuum. The Templar philosophy of an iron-fisted order will never sound more appealing to those in power than in the very chaotic circumstances that we've created. It's a great moment and fits in beautifully with the ideological themes of the game. Altair also spares Maria here, saying that since she's not his target, she can go. And this moment is strange. Throughout the game, Altair has been interacting with people tangentially related to his targets, and those interactions almost always end with the person's death. The final couple interrogations feel the most unjust to me. They seem like they're just heralds doing their job, and Altair kills them on the off chance that they'd warn his target that he's approaching. So his sparing of Maria is a little illogical, and she even shows up as red in the eagle vision, so it's not like he has some supernatural awareness of the part she has yet to play. Altair's sparing of Maria is an emotional decision, and it's revealing of the very thing that will ultimately define his argument with Al-Mualim and Altair's new direction for the Assassin Brotherhood. It is emotional, and I think we have to be okay with that. If they meant to show an attraction here, I don't think it comes through in the text at all, but if this is just a way for Altair to demonstrate that he's done enough killing, I don't mind it. Mercy feels good. Allowing himself to trust his gut feels like a good thing. It feels like the right thing to do, and that is vital. That is so vital because this is a choice that a Templar would never make. Except for one specific Templar in one specific game, but we'll get to him who knows when. Altair follows his emotions here, and he'll later do the same in the garden when he argues with Al-Mualim. This is probably a massive stretch, but I wonder if this moment is put here to connect Altair with the story of Paris, especially because we're about to revisit the Adam and Eve imagery in the Al-Mualim conversation. So revisiting the Trojan War and the Apple of Discord incident would make thematic sense. Paris made an emotional decision as well, in awarding the apple to Aphrodite, who promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. I don't know, I don't think that they thought all that hard about it, but I just wanted to clock that and maybe someone else has a more cohesive idea for how this moment fits. Back at the Bureau, Altair talks over this new development with Malik.
And we have ourselves to blame. The men I've killed, men on both sides of the conflict, men important to both leaders. Robert's plan may be ambitious, but it makes sense, and it could work.
Look, brother, things have changed. You must return to Masyaf. We cannot act without our master's permission. It could compromise the Brotherhood. I thought you had learned this.
Stop hiding behind words, Malik. You wield the Creed and its tenets like some shield. He's keeping things from us. Important things.
The earlier exchange with Malik saw Altair demonstrate his emotional growth. Now we get to witness his growing intellectual confidence. He trusts his understanding of the Creed enough to push back on Malik and follow his instincts. Being a good assassin is not about subservience, despite Al-Mualim's frequent insistence to the contrary. His mind made up, Altair rides for Arsuf. To get to Richard, he has to fight his way through dozens of men from both armies. Like I mentioned back with the final Al-Mualim discussion, we're building a powerful sense of climax. This fight to Robert is a dramatic but mundane fight, Altair methodically cutting his way to Richard to save his brotherhood. It makes for a fascinating contrast with a return to Masyaf, which will practically be a ghost town under the new rule of a corrupted Al-Mualim. When he at last arrives at Richard, he tells the king about Robert's planned betrayal, and Robert, of course, denies it.
Hold a moment, Robert. Why? What do you intend? Surely you do not believe him?
It is a difficult decision, one I cannot make alone. I must leave it in the hands of one wiser than I.
Thank you.
No, Robert, not you.
Then who?
The Lord. Let this be decided by combat.
That little moment there of Robert thinking King Richard is referring to him when he says one wiser than I is one of my favorite moments in the game. Just the casual arrogance of a man who knows that God doesn't exist in this universe, overlooking the fact that his king, perhaps the most powerful man on the battlefield, still believes in one. Robert probably could have talked his way out of this, were he a little wiser and a little more patient, but unlike Altair, Robert doesn't seem to have matured over the course of the game. And in the end, his arrogance costs him his life. Altair cuts down his men and eventually lands the killing blow on Robert, who meets his death with some degree of grace as he confesses something crucial to Altair.
It wasn't 9 who found the treasure, assassin. Not 9, but 10.
A 10th? None may live who carry the secret. Give me his name.
Oh, but you know him well. And I doubt very much you'd take his life as willingly as you've taken mine.
Who?
It is your master, Al-Mualim.
But he is not a Templar.
Did you never wonder how it is he knew so much? Where to find us, how many we numbered, what we aspired to attain?
He is the master of the assassins.
Oui, master of lies. You and I just 2 more pawns in his grand game.
Meh? This reveal seems to imply that Al-Mualim was or still is an actual Templar and was part of this organization, even though the start of the game implies that the Assassins and Templars already have a combative history. Even setting that aside, we're supposed to understand that the ancient Al-Mualim, who, even armed with the Apple of Eden, loses the fight against Altair, was part of this elite Templar expedition that found the apple, and nobody from his assassins remarks on his absence, and none of the other Templars, not Sabrand or Tamir or Garnier, ever say, "Oh kiddo, you got another thing coming," as they lay dying, even though they all know it would probably save the lives of their Templar brothers by turning Altair against Al-Mualim. The Al-Mualim twist is terrible, but the most baffling thing is that it didn't need to be. This story would be more effective, the ending more tense, if Al-Mualim was never a Templar, if he was a virtuous mentor that was slowly corrupted by the apple over the course of the game. The apple then falling into Altair's possession would be a bittersweet ending. We wouldn't know how he would be able to handle its power. It would certainly raise the stakes for keeping it out of Abstergo's hands, a powerful company that could be so easily poisoned by its corrupting influence. Instead, we make him a secret Templar. I just don't get it. I don't want to harp on this too much, though I'm sure I already have. This twist just doesn't work for me, and I don't think they do nearly enough to set it up properly. It's possible I'm missing something though. Still reeling from Al-Mualim's apparent betrayal, Altair speaks to King Richard.
Some men cannot be reasoned with.
Like that madman, Saladin.
I think he'd like to see an end to this war as much as you.
So I've heard, but never seen.
Even if he doesn't say it, it's what the people want. Saracen and Crusader alike.
The people know not what they want. It's why they turn to men like us.
Then it falls to men like you to do what is right.
Nonsense. We come into the world kicking and screaming, violent and unstable. It is what we are. We cannot help ourselves.
No. We are what we choose to be.
This is a great moment and almost makes up for the whole Al-Mualim thing. Richard says that the people don't know what they want. It's why they turn to men like him. And mere moments ago, when he didn't know what he wanted, he turned to God. Richard is buying into what the assassins call the illusion, the belief that the world is governed by divine laws rather than pure reason. And here, Altair gently guides Richard away from that approach. He tells him that Saladin also wants to see an end to this war, reminds him that he has a choice, that everyone should have a choice, and then bids him safety and peace as he leaves. With Altair on his way back to Masyaf to confront his mentor, Desmond is pulled from the Animus again. The assassins are attacking Abstergo. They're coming to rescue him. It doesn't go so great.
Here, have a listen.
That's been neutralized.
Looks like the cavalry won't be coming.
It's a strange and low-budget way to have this story moment, but it works with the minimalist approach the game has taken with the modern-day storyline. Vidic storms out afterwards, and Lucy tries to comfort Desmond.
It's not as bad as it seems.
What are you talking about? They just killed, literally killed, my only chance of getting out of here. And then I find out the assassins are all but destroyed, and Christ, I still don't know what these people are planning. But I do know they plan to kill me when they're done. I am screwed, okay? What do you want me to do?
Just try and have a little faith. Have faith.
That line, have faith, is what we noted all the way back at the start of the game, the words that Lucy said to Vidic in the conference room that seemed knowingly aimed at Desmond. The reveal is fine. Most players will have known Lucy is an assassin from reading her extremely suspicious emails on her company computer, but the gesture and the circling back to the faith line is nice. Desmond wakes up to Vidic's pronouncement that it's going to be a historic day, and we climb back into the Animus to witness Altair's dramatic confrontation with Al-Mualim. Altair returns to a village covered in shadows, and for what I think is the first time all game, we get this Dutch angle shot for this conversation to heighten the unease.
There is only what the Master shows us. This is the truth.
You've lost your mind.
Seeing the village so lifeless and gray is eerie after all the times we've walked through it. And at the top of the hill, Altair is confronted by two waves of mindless assassins that try to cut him down. He fights them off easily, though quite lethally, and before long, Malik arrives with a contingent of loyalists at his back, ready to support his friend.
Guard yourself well, friend. Al-Mualim has betrayed us.
Yes. Betrayed his Templar allies as well.
How do you know?
After we spoke, I returned to the ruins beneath Solomon's temple. Robert had kept a journal, filled its pages with revelations. What I read there broke my heart. But it also opened my eyes. You were right, Altair. All along, our master has used us.
I love this moment as the cherry on top for the Altair-Malik bromance, but what? Robert Assab personally kept a journal of Templar secrets that included juicy details about Al-Mualim's involvement, but just left it in the ruins beneath Solomon's temple for anyone to find? A journal that, were it found by anyone else, could have exposed his treachery to King Richard and probably led to the execution of his entire order. He just left it. Just left it, despite having multiple allies in the city that could have retrieved it for him. Was there really no other way we could have motivated Malik's decision here? It had to be Robert's secret little diary? It sounds like a bit of a nitpick, and I guess it is, but it's just disappointing when we think about how this moment could have been handled in a more satisfying way. Malik finding Robert's diary is a boring narrative moment that strains credulity, so not only do we undermine our climax, but we're missing out on a dozen more interesting ways that Malik might have returned. We might have given Altair a moment of genuine persuasion back at the Bureau. Malik might have even found a somewhat repentant Maria on the streets of Jerusalem, but instead we get this journal tidbit. As Altair enters the castle, the gate clangs shut behind him with an ominous finality. The courtyard is empty, which means the annoying trainer is finally gone.
Altair, it seems my students do not fully understand what it is to wield a blade. Perhaps you could show them what you know.
Maybe Al-Mualim's ideas aren't all bad after all. Altair pushes through the crowd in front of the castle and makes for the garden out back. It's a little on the nose that this conflict over the Apple of Eden takes place in a garden, and I've even seen it mentioned in wiki entries that this area of the castle was referred to as Paradise, though that's not something I've been able to confirm or verify in-game. Is Al-Mualim supposed to be the serpent, and that by beating him back, Altair saves mankind from the temptation of the apple, possibly redeeming man for that original sin? I don't think that really works, and I also don't think Altair would say that anything needs redeeming. There's another interpretation that I really like here. I read that Catholicism teaches that the fruits themselves were not evil since they were created by God, and everything that God created, quote, was good. So it was the disobeying of God to eat the fruit, not the eating of the fruits, that caused the disorder. Which is really interesting when we take that idea and apply it to Assassin's Creed and the competing ideologies of the Templars and Assassins with regards to order. The Assassins will embrace disorder as the price of freedom. The Assassins would view this consumption of the fruit as a good thing, the key to leaving the gilded cage. The apple itself isn't the problem, and that's something that kind of carries over to the fiction of Assassin's Creed. This is an artifact that can be put to virtuous use. In future games, we'll learn that Altair has studied it for decades, used its secrets to aid his brotherhood. If I don't sound very confident in these biblical connections, it's because I'm absolutely not. I'm not a religious person, and I haven't studied religious texts from a historical or literary perspective yet either. So it's a fairly substantial blind spot for me. I've done my best for this video, but it's likely there are a lot of symbols or references that I'm missing here in this game, and I'm sure more will come up as we move through the Ezio trilogy. Al-Mualim has a moderately villainous monologue before sending 9 assassins after Altair, each made to look like one of the targets we killed in-game. As Altair cuts them down, the illusion is broken, and we see the lifeless bodies of his former brothers. It would have been a much more impactful scene if these bodies stayed on the ground after the fight while we battled with Al-Mualim himself. As it stands, the real bodies fade away and reduce the emotional gut punch of what should be a pretty devastating encounter. When the bodies vanish, they glow with the light from the apple. Maybe we're supposed to understand that even the assassins under the targets were illusions, that none of this was real. If that was the case, it could be an interesting parallel to the Assassin-Templar conflict in this game, that when that veneer is removed, they're essentially the same, and compared to the Piece of Eden, they're united in their insignificance. This could also just be Al-Mualim tidying up his garden though. Water features are finicky enough as is without a fellowship of corpses in moist decay. Altair fights his way through these men with relative ease, and by now Al-Mualim has descended down to face Altair himself. Altair challenges him to a more honorable fight, and Al-Mualim uses the apple to summon multiple illusions to support him. I think you can end this early by spotting the real one with eagle vision, but after listening to this oafish geriatric prattle on all game, I find a dark satisfaction in fighting him so many times. Now defeated for a second time, Al-Mualim uses the apple to take hold of Altair once more. It's very reminiscent of the position the two were in at the start of the game.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
After 2 visually interesting but narratively hollow fights, we get what's probably the most important conversation in the game.
You lied to me. Called Robert's goal foul when all along it was yours as well.
I've never been much good at sharing.
You won't succeed. Others will find the strength to stand against you.
And this is why, so long as men maintain free will, there can be no peace.
Al-Mualim laughs, and Altair asks why he never made him a thrall like the others. Al-Mualim admits that he tried, back at the start of this act, when we saw him speak to Altair with the apple in hand. It didn't work.
You saw through the illusion.
Illusion?
Illusion. That's all it's ever done. This Templar treasure, this piece of Eden, this word of God. Do you understand now? The Red Sea was never parted. Water never turned to wine. It was not the machinations of Iris that spawned the Trojan War, but this! Illusions! All of them!
What you plan is no less an illusion. To force men to follow you against their will.
Is it any less real than the phantoms the Saracens and Crusaders follow now? Those craven gods who retreat from this world that men might slaughter one another in their names? They live amongst an illusion already. I'm simply giving them another. One that demands less blood.
Least they choose these phantoms.
Or do they? Aside from the occasional convert or heretic?
It isn't right.
Ah, and now logic has left you. In its place, you embrace emotion. I am disappointed.
I love where this conversation goes, even if I'm not a fan of how we get there. If this was going to be where Al-Mualim ended up, it would have been more interesting to see how and why he gets to this position. I guess since he was secretly a Templar the whole time, apparently this is a version of peace in all things through control, but I just wish we got to see or hear why he abandons his creed. Is it really just the temptation of the apple? Not being able to resist, ending all conflict when that power is within the palm of your hand? This final bit of the exchange is my favorite.
It isn't right.
Ah, and now logic has left you. In its place, you embrace emotion.
Because yes, that's exactly what Altair is doing, and I love that he doesn't apologize for it. His creed commands him to be wise, and now he's wise enough to understand that despite the nobility of his goal, Al-Mualim's means to achieve it are wrong. Free will is illogical. Allowing for the possibility of chaos and suffering when you might have the means to prevent it is illogical. But when those means involve stripping the human race of free will, of the chance to choose goodness, it just feels wrong. Sometimes you just have to let go and try your best, but accept that things will be messy and, as Lucy would say, have faith. Part of why I love this conversation is that we're presenting two incredibly valid outlooks. Here I am applauding Altair's gut instincts about protecting free will, but we've also seen the consequences of an unshepherded world. William ordered the execution of 3,000 prisoners of war. Saladin retaliated in kind. We've seen women and scholars and monks harassed by guards in the cities. We've seen innocent people killed or victimized by others just because they can. Back in his fortress, his decades of training his mind and body ensuring his perpetual freedom, it can be so easy for Altair to say, let's choose the glorious chaos because it's right. That might not be a perspective shared by the soldiers who die by the thousands, the scholars who are cut down for wearing white robes. In the modern day storyline, we've read about a plague annihilating most of the African continent, hurricanes ravaging the globe. There are real and genuine consequences for fighting against the Templar vision. And that's what I find so compelling about this game, is that it wants us to think about all of that. Altair and Al-Mualim cross blades again, and this time Altair lands the killing blow.
You held fire in your hand, old man. It should have been destroyed.
Destroy the only thing capable of ending the Crusades and creating true peace? Never.
Then I will.
We'll see about that.
Altair won't be able to destroy the apple, temptation given form as Al-Mualim once called it. And we know that he is correct that it can be destroyed because centuries in the future, Desmond will read in Vidic's email that it has been. It's a huge cliffhanger on which to leave Altair's story, but leave it we do. Having seen the map the apple projects, Desmond is pulled from the Animus as a triumphant Vidic celebrates his victory with Abstergo higher-ups watching from another room.
We've got the map.
How many?
At least half a dozen.
They want to kill Desmond, but Lucy argues that keeping him alive until they have the artifacts is a safer play, and they acquiesce. As he struts out of the room, Vidic says,
"We've got a lot of work to do. Don't get too comfortable, Mr. Miles. We'll be back for you soon enough."
As Desmond climbs out of the Animus, his vision suddenly changes. He's seeing the world through eagle vision, suddenly seeing hidden symbols all around the room. Panning over to Lucy, and Vidic reveals that Lucy is colored blue. She really is his ally. Overwhelmed by this sudden power, he heads back to his room, and that's when a giant wall of symbols and codes is revealed just above his bed. The same kind of iconography that's been haunting his dreams all game.
Oh my god. It looks like... Is that blood? What the hell were they keeping here before me? And what happened to him? What does it mean, I wonder?
And that right there is where the credits roll, on this unorthodox bombshell of Desmond's new eagle vision. In a story about the illusion, whether fighting to create a new one or fighting to tear the current one down, the fact that the big power our heroes have is just supernatural visual clarity is so thematically resonant. After the credits roll, Desmond can wander the room, deciphering these symbols, and he did, in the games of thousands of players in the 2 years that they waited for Assassin's Creed 2. The Assassin's Creed Wiki has a page that goes over the meaning of each and every one of these messages. I'll link it in the description, but with 2 years between releases, this was such a bold and interesting way to leave things, and cements this game as the start of something big. We're gonna do the Lost thing. We're going to give you a big and mysterious world with clues and signs and characters that you talk over with your friends and you read about on the internet. It's doing what great mystery boxes do. It's answering some questions and giving us more. And it's giving us questions that we can answer ourselves if we're curious enough to go looking for information. If we just take this game on its own terms, I think it absolutely nails that. And while Assassin's Creed 2 is an extremely strong second chapter, by the end of Brotherhood, the modern day goes off the rails and we never really bother with the train tracks again. So if you only want to view Assassin's Creed 1 as the start of what ends up being a sloppy and disappointing story, that's absolutely fair. But if you can separate it and appreciate it on its own terms, it's still quite messy, but it's ambitious and it stepped up to the plate and took a ridiculously grand swing. And yeah, maybe it resulted in a double and never ended up scoring, but just look at what it does. It blends history and science fiction and mythology to beautiful effect, gives us a set of antagonists whose goals are the literal opposite of the generic chaos and bloodshed. And it pushes us to ask ourselves if abstract concepts of choice and goodness are worth killing and dying for. So messy though it may be, it's hard to not love what this game is trying to do. Assassin's Creed is so far from perfect, perhaps even a good distance away from being great. But I'm compelled to love it anyway because of its sheer audacity. It shot for the moon and missed by miles. It often feels too insecure in its premise, and undermines both its first half mystery and climactic twist with awkward and clunky writing. But somehow back in 2007, in one gigantic, bizarre release, Ubisoft spawned a universe, and behold, it was very good. With such a sparse and minimalistic approach, despite a shocking lack of planning and narrative discipline, they somehow created a universe capable of supporting a dozen sequels and spin-offs. This game is sloppy, this game is heartless, its characters eminently forgettable, its arcs more akin to 2 vague dots separated by 10 hours of repetitive gameplay and dialogue. And it somehow, barely, sticks the landing despite this. I have no idea where this series is going, whether in future games or the upcoming television adaptation, but Assassin's Creed 1 put down such fervent roots that despite multiple creative missteps, this franchise is only growing larger by the day. I think my instinct is to be cynical, to think that this series' best days are long behind it, but who knows, maybe we should, to quote a certain assassin.
Try and have a little faith.
Oh, wait, she's not an assassin. You see, Lucy is a Templar the whole time, and that's why Juno possesses Desmond and he has to kill her in the vault in Brotherhood. It has nothing to do with how Kristen Bell asked for royalties for her appearance in the games and upcoming sequels, and the creative director allegedly killed off her character right after she asked for that reason. It actually makes total sense in the game. You see, the Templars called it Project Siren. She was actually working with Vidic and just wanted to take Desmond somewhere where he would feel safe. And even though we don't set up this twist with any clue or line of dialogue in a series that's all about...
It's on.
What happened to you?
It's on and popping up in here, you feel?
What happened to you?
What?
You didn't used to be like this.
What are you talking about?
You've gotten so much worse.
It's on and popping.